Every so often, a headline comes along that perfectly captures what's gone wrong with streaming. Not because it's dramatic or shocking, but because it's so quietly absurd that it forces you to stop and ask, why are we still doing this? That was my reaction when Comic Book Resources published their article announcing that the first 3 Karate Kid movies are leaving Netflix in January of 2026. Now, I did mess up when writing this intro because it's actually, it's not just the first 3 Karate Kid movies, it's also the 2010 remake of the Karate Kid leaving Netflix as well, okay? On paper, it's just another licensing shuffle. Titles rotate in and out all the time, but this one hits differently because it exposes a deeper, ongoing problem with the way streaming works today. The people who actually pay for these services are the ones getting punished. And the more you think about it, the more nonsensical it becomes. These aren't random catalog titles disappearing in the middle of the night. These aren't forgotten movies from the back of a studio vault. These are the foundational films for Cobra Kai, one of Netflix's biggest success stories of the last decade. The show doesn't just reference those movies, it continues them. It builds on their characters, their arcs, their emotional history. Cobra Kai is, in every meaningful way, the next chapter of the Karate Kid saga. So why would Netflix keep the continuation but lose the foundation? To understand how bizarre this is, you have to remember where Cobra Kai came from. When the show first premiered, it wasn't on Netflix, it wasn't on Hulu, it wasn't on Amazon, it was on YouTube Red of all places. YouTube's short-lived attempt to pivot into prestige television. And the result was exactly what you'd expect from a platform nobody wanted. The first 2 seasons of Cobra Kai were critically acclaimed, but barely anyone saw them. Not because the show wasn't good, but because the platform was a ghost town. YouTube Red was one of those corporate experiments where a company tries to convince the world it can compete with Netflix simply because it has the money to try. But money doesn't create an audience. Convenience does. Netflix didn't just acquire Cobra Kai, they rescued it. They took a show stranded on a subscription service nobody used and put it in front of millions of people. Overnight, Cobra Kai went from a hidden gem to a global phenomenon. It became one of Netflix's flagship series, the kind of show people binge in a weekend and then immediately rewatch. It became a cultural touchstone, a nostalgia revival that actually worked, something that honored the original films while expanding them in ways that felt fresh. And that's what makes this decision so baffling. Because if Netflix is the platform where Cobra Kai found its audience, if Netflix is the reason the show became a hit, then why would the movies that give the show its entire emotional backbone be allowed to walk out the door? Imagine if Disney Plus suddenly removed the original Star Wars trilogy while still hosting The Mandalorian. Imagine if Breaking Bad disappeared from Netflix but Better Call Saul stayed. It's not just inconvenient, it's hostile to the people who actually care about the story. It breaks the narrative ecosystem. It forces viewers to chase down the pieces of a franchise that should logically live together. And the thing is, people don't watch Cobra Kai in isolation. They revisit the original films. They show them to their kids. They go back to see the moments the show references, the characters it brings back, the arcs it continues. The movies and the show are part of the same experience. Splitting them across platforms isn't just a licensing decision. It's a disruption of how audiences actually engage with the franchise. This is where the frustration starts to creep in. Because if you own the movies on DVD, Blu-ray, or 4K, none of this affects you. Physical media doesn't disappear because a contract expired. Physical media doesn't get shuffled around because a studio wants to renegotiate its streaming rights. Physical media sits on your shelf, immune to corporate whims. But streaming has conditioned people to accept access instead of ownership. It's trained people to believe that everything they want to watch will always be available somewhere as long as they keep paying their monthly fee. And now that trust is being broken. The moment a platform decides it doesn't want to pay for the rights anymore, or a studio decides it wants to reshuffle its library, the people who play by the rules are the ones who lose access. Not the pirates, not the people who download everything, the people who actually pay for these services, the people who try to do things the right way. And that's why this Karate Kid situation matters. It's not just about 3 movies leaving Netflix, it's about what it represents. A system where the people who support these platforms are treated as an afterthought. A system where continuity, convenience, and common sense take a backseat to licensing deals and corporate strategy. What makes this whole situation even more frustrating is that it highlights a pattern that's been building for years. The people who actually pay for streaming services are the ones who end up with the least stability, the least reliability, and the least control. They're the ones who wake up one morning to find out that the movie they plan to watch this weekend is gone. They're the ones who get hit with price hikes while the libraries shrink. They're the ones who are expected to juggle multiple subscriptions just to keep up with the shows and movies they love. And somehow, the industry acts surprised when people start looking for alternatives. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When you make legal access harder, people don't suddenly stop wanting the thing. They just stop trying to get it legally. And the Karate Kid situation is a perfect example of how this happens. If you're someone who discovered Cobra Kai on Netflix, which, let's be honest, is most people, and you want to revisit the original films to refresh your memory or introduce them to someone new, you expect them to be there. You expect the franchise to live in one place. That's the entire promise of streaming. Convenience. The idea that everything you want to watch is right there, ready to go, no hunting, no hassle. But when the foundational movies disappear while the continuation stays, that promise collapses. Suddenly, you're forced to track down where the movies went. Did they move to another service? Are they behind another paywall? Are they available to rent? Are they exclusive to a platform you don't have? And if you want to watch the whole franchise in order, you're now expected to subscribe to multiple services just to recreate what used to be available in one place. And this is where the industry completely misunderstands how people actually behave. Because the assumption seems to be that audiences will follow content wherever it goes. That if a movie or show jumps from one platform to another, people will dutifully sign up for the new service, pay the new fee, and keep watching. But that's not how real people operate. Real people follow convenience, not contracts. If you want proof, look what happened when The Office left Netflix and moved to Peacock. Did people watch more of The Office after the move? Of course not. Viewership didn't migrate, it cratered. Because the show didn't become less popular, it became less convenient. And convenience is the entire reason streaming took off in the first place. This is the part the industry refuses to acknowledge. People don't want to chase content across platforms. They don't want to keep track of which service has which movie this month. They don't want to subscribe to 5 different apps just to watch one franchise. They want simplicity. They want stability. They want to know that when they sit down to watch something, it'll actually be there. And when that stability disappears, people start looking for alternatives. Not because they're trying to be rebellious or edgy or anti-corporate, but because they just want to watch the thing they're interested in without jumping through hoops. And when the legal path becomes too fragmented, too expensive, or too inconvenient, the illegal path starts to look like the path of least resistance. This isn't a moral argument, it's a behavioral one. People don't turn to piracy because they're philosophically opposed to paying for content. They turn to piracy because the legal options fail to meet their needs. And the Karate Kid situation is exactly the kind of decision that pushes people in that direction. If the movies aren't available on the platform where the continuation lives, and if watching the full story requires multiple subscriptions, multiple apps, and multiple fees, a lot of people are going to say, forget it. I'll just download them and move on with my life. And here's the thing. This isn't new. This isn't some shocking revelation. This is the exact same pattern we saw in the early 2000s with music piracy. Back then, people weren't downloading songs because they believed in some grand ideology about information freedom. They were downloading songs because CDs cost $20 and you only wanted one track, right? You only wanted to listen to Tub Thumping or Baby One More Time. The legal option was overpriced and inconvenient, so people found a workaround. Streaming originally solved that problem. It made legal access easier than illegal access. But now, the industry is undoing that progress. It's recreating the exact conditions that made piracy explode in the first place. What makes all of this even more absurd is that we've already seen what happens when a major platform loses a major piece of a franchise or a cultural touchstone. We've lived through it. When Netflix lost the Marvel shows, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Punisher, and The Defenders, it wasn't just a licensing shift. It was a moment of genuine panic for people who loved those shows. Not because they were disappearing forever, but because nobody knew what would happen to them next. Would they end up on Disney Plus? Would they be censored? Would they be edited? Would they be buried under a mountain of algorithm-driven content? And the fear wasn't irrational. Disney has a long history of sanitizing content to fit its brand image, and the Netflix Marvel shows were not exactly family-friendly. They were violent, gritty, and unapologetically adult. So when they left Netflix, people weren't just worried about losing access. They were worried about losing the version of the shows they loved. They were worried that the next time they saw Daredevil, it would be a watered-down version of itself. That moment revealed something important. People don't trust streaming platforms to preserve the things they care about. They don't trust these companies to keep the shows intact, to keep them available, or to keep them in one place. And that distrust has only grown as more and more content gets shuffled around like it's part of a corporate shell game. Which brings us back to Cobra Kai. Because if Netflix can lose the Karate Kid movies while still hosting the show that continues them, what happens when Netflix eventually loses Cobra Kai itself? What happens when the contract expires? What happens when Sony decides it wants the show on its own platform, or on a different platform, or on whatever new service launches next year? Are people supposed to follow it? Are they supposed to subscribe to yet another service just to keep watching a show they've already invested years into? And again, look at the precedent. When The Office left Netflix and moved to Peacock, people didn't follow it. Viewership didn't migrate, it collapsed. Not because The Office suddenly became less funny, but because it became less convenient. The same thing happened with Friends when it left Netflix for Max. It didn't matter that Friends was one of the most rewatched shows of the streaming era. Once it moved to a smaller platform, the casual rewatchers, the people who kept it alive in the algorithm, simply stopped watching. And then there's Parks and Rec. When it left Netflix, it didn't spark a mass migration to Peacock as well. It didn't ignite a cultural revival. It didn't suddenly become the centerpiece of a new streaming service. It just faded. Not because the show lost its charm, but because it lost its accessibility. The casual audience, the people who put it on in the background, the people who rewatched it every year, the people who kept it in the cultural bloodstream, didn't chase it. They moved on to whatever was still on Netflix. This is the part the industry refuses to understand. They think the content is the draw. They think the brand is the draw. They think the franchise is the draw. But the real draw, the thing that made streaming explode in the first place, was convenience. It was the idea that everything you wanted to watch was in one place for one price with no hoops to jump through. And that brings us to the economics of all this. Because the reason these movies and shows keep bouncing around isn't artistic, it isn't creative, it isn't even strategic in the way studios pretend it is, it's financial. It's about licensing fees, exclusivity deals, and the endless corporate obsession with quote-unquote owning the customer relationship, even if that means making the experience worse for the people who actually pay for these services. But here's the irony. This strategy doesn't work. It never has. When Epix pulled its movies from Netflix and moved them to Hulu, piracy for those titles didn't go down. It didn't stay the same. It went up by 20%. Because when you take something off the biggest platform and move it to a smaller one, people don't follow. They just simply find another way. And this isn't an isolated case. Study after study after study has shown the same thing. When legal access becomes fragmented, piracy rises. When content becomes exclusive to niche platforms, piracy rises. When prices increase without added value, piracy rises. Restricting access has never reduced piracy. It only pushes people toward illegal alternatives. And the reason is simple. People want convenience. They want stability. They want to know that when they sit down to watch something, it'll actually be there. And when the legal path becomes too complicated, too expensive, or too unpredictable, the illegal path starts to look like the easier option. This is the part that should terrify the streaming industry, because it's the exact same mistake the music industry made in the early 2000s. Back then, the RIAA spent $20 million in a single year suing alleged pirates, teenagers, single moms, grandparents, dead people. Yes, they legitimately were suing dead people at one point. But anyone who downloaded a Britney Spears song here, or a Jonas Brothers song there off of LimeWire, Kazaa, BearShare, take your pick. There were a bunch of file sharing sites. And what did they get back? What did the RIAA get back from all that? About $500,000 in settlements. They were lighting money on fire. They were bankrupting themselves trying to punish people instead of trying to understand why piracy was happening in the first place. And the reason piracy was happening was simple. CDs cost too much, and people only wanted one song. The legal option was overpriced and inconvenient, so people found a workaround. And the lawsuits didn't stop piracy. They didn't slow it down. They didn't even make a dent. Piracy only declined when streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube Music made legal access easier than illegal access. Streaming solved the piracy problem by being better than piracy. And now, somehow, the movie and TV industry is undoing that progress. They're recreating the exact conditions that made piracy explode in the first place. They're fragmenting content across a dozen platforms. They're raising prices. They're shrinking libraries. They're making access unpredictable. And every time they do it, the people who play by the rules are the ones who get punished. What makes all of this even more tragic is that streaming didn't have to end up this way. In fact, the early 2010s were the closest the entertainment industry ever came to solving the piracy problem entirely. For a brief moment, everything actually worked. Piracy didn't disappear, but it fell off a cliff. Not because people suddenly became more ethical, but because the legal option was finally easier than the illegal one. You didn't need to hunt down torrents or deal with sketchy websites to worry about malware. You just opened Netflix, and everything you wanted was right there. Back then, the streaming landscape was simple. There were 3 major services: Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime Video. Between them, you could watch almost anything you wanted, and subscribing to all 3 was still cheaper than basic cable. It was the perfect balance of convenience, affordability, and completeness. You didn't need to think about where something was streaming. You didn't need to juggle multiple apps. You didn't need to track licensing windows. You just pressed play. And that simplicity was the entire point. Streaming wasn't designed to be a luxury. It wasn't designed to be a fragmented ecosystem of competing fiefdoms. It was designed to be the antidote to the chaos of the early 2000s. It was designed to make legal access so easy that piracy became unnecessary. And for a while, it worked. People stopped downloading movies because they didn't need to. They stopped ripping DVDs because they didn't need to. They stopped hoarding files on hard drives because they didn't need to. But then the studios got greedy. Instead of seeing streaming as a solution, they saw it as a gold rush. They saw Netflix's success and decided they wanted a piece of it. They wanted their own platforms, their own subscription fees, their own walled gardens. And one by one, they pulled their libraries off Netflix and launched their own services. Disney launched Disney Plus, Warner Bros. Launched HBO Max, then later just renamed Max, and then later renamed back to HBO Max. Paramount launched CBS All Access, then changed to Paramount Plus. NBC launched Peacock. Every studio wanted to be Netflix, even though Netflix only worked because everything was in one place. And the result was predictable. Instead of 1 or 2 or 3 services, we now have a dozen. Instead of a unified library, we have a fragmented mess. Instead of convenience, we have confusion. And instead of solving piracy, the industry has recreated the exact conditions that made piracy explode in the first place. Because here's the thing, people don't want to subscribe to 10 different services. They don't want to pay $15 here, $12 there, $20 over there, just to recreate what Netflix used to offer by itself. They don't want to keep track of which platform has which show this month. They don't want to deal with content hopping from service to service like it's playing a game of musical chairs. They don't want to be told that the movie they watched last week is suddenly gone because a licensing deal expired. And they definitely don't want to pay more for less. But that's exactly what's happening. Subscription prices keep going up and up, libraries keep shrinking, ads keep getting added, and the people who actually pay for these services are the ones who get punished. They're the ones who lose access. They're the ones who get nickeled and dimed. They're the ones who are expected to keep paying more while getting less. Meanwhile, the pirates? They don't deal with any of this shit. They don't worry about licensing windows. They don't worry about price hikes. They don't worry about content disappearing. They don't worry about fragmentation. They don't worry about corporate strategy. They just download what they want and move on with their lives. And that's the part the industry refuses to acknowledge. They think piracy is a moral failing. They think it's a problem you can solve with lawsuits or DRM or takedown notices. But piracy has never been a moral issue. It's a convenience issue. It's a value issue. It's a stability issue. And right now, the legal path is losing on all 3 fronts. The irony is almost poetic. Streaming was supposed to be the solution to piracy. It was supposed to be the thing that made illegal access obsolete. But instead of building on that success, the industry dismantled it. They took the one system that actually worked and broke it into pieces. And now they're shocked that piracy is rising again. And the Karate Kid situation is a perfect example of how this happens. When you take a franchise that should logically live in one place and scatter it across multiple platforms, you're not encouraging people to subscribe. You're encouraging them to give up. You're encouraging them to look for alternatives. You're encouraging them to say, if the legal path is complicated, why bother? And that's the real tragedy here. Not that the Karate Kid movies are leaving Netflix. Not that Cobra Kai might eventually follow. But that the industry has forgotten why streaming succeeded in the first place and why piracy declined. They've forgotten that people don't want to chase content. They don't want to juggle subscriptions. They don't want to be punished for playing by the rules. They just want things to be simple again. What the Karate Kid situation really exposes is how fragile the modern streaming experience has become. Not because 3 movies are leaving Netflix, but because it shows how easily the foundation of a franchise can be pulled out from under the people who care about it. It shows how little stability there is in a system that was supposed to make things simpler. And it shows how quickly the promise of streaming, the promise that everything you love would be accessible, affordable, and easy, has eroded. Because when you strip away all the corporate strategy and licensing jargon, what's left is a very basic truth. People just want to watch the stories they love without feeling like they're being punished for it. They want to revisit the movies that shaped them. They want to follow the shows that continue those stories. They want to share them with their kids, their friends, their families. They want the experience to feel seamless, not scattered. And that's the part the industry keeps missing. They think the audience will adapt to whatever new system they create. They think people will follow content across platforms indefinitely. They think loyalty to a franchise is stronger than frustration with the system that delivers it. But loyalty has limits. Convenience has limits. Patience has limits. And every time a franchise gets split apart, every time a show loses its home, every time a library shrinks while the price goes up, those limits get tested. The truth is, people aren't asking for perfection. They're not asking for every movie ever made. They're not asking for a utopian archive of infinite content. They're asking for something far more reasonable, a system that respects their time, their money, and their investment. A system that doesn't make them chase down the pieces of a story that should live together. A system that doesn't treat their loyalty like an afterthought. And that's why the Karate Kid leaving Netflix matters. Not because it's the end of the world, but because it's a reminder of how unstable everything has become. It's a reminder that the convenience we once took for granted is no longer guaranteed. It's a reminder that the people who play by the rules, the people who actually pay for these services, are the ones who feel the consequences of decisions they have no control over. If streaming wants to survive in the long term, it has to rediscover the thing that made it successful in the first place. Not exclusivity, not fragmentation, not endless subscription tiers. Simplicity, stability, a sense that the things you love will still be there tomorrow. Because right now, the system is drifting further and further away from that ideal. And every time a franchise gets scattered, every time a show loses its home, every time a movie disappears without warning, the message becomes clearer. The convenience that wants to find streaming is slipping away. People don't want to chase content. They don't want to juggle subscriptions. They don't want to feel like they're renting their childhood memories month to month. They want a system that works, a system that respects them, a system that remembers why streaming became the dominant way we watch anything in the first place. And until the industry finds its way back to that, moments like The Karate Kid leaving Netflix won't just be licensing quirks. They'll be warnings, reminders that the foundation is cracking, and that the people who built streaming into what it is today are the ones being left behind.